June 6, 1944, Normandy coast and German command centers across occupied France. A German signals officer on duty near the Cotentin Peninsula is logging routine radio traffic when reports begin arriving of parachutes seen in the dark, aircraft engines overhead, and gunfire inland. Within minutes, coastal radar stations report large formations of unidentified aircraft crossing the channel. Naval observers soon follow with confirmations of heavy ship movement offshore. None of the reports taken alone are definitive. Together they signal the opening of something long feared and endlessly anticipated. At the headquarters of the 7th Army in Le Mans, telephones ring continuously as officers attempt to assemble a coherent picture. Messages arrive out of sequence, some incomplete, others contradictory. Airborne landings are reported near Sainte-Mère-Église, then farther east near the Orne River. Coastal batteries along the Normandy shore report naval bombardment of unusual intensity. Infantry units report being cut off by paratroopers they cannot yet identify by nationality. The initial assessment remains cautious. German doctrine has trained commanders to expect deception, and the Allied record of diversion operations has reinforced that expectation. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the senior German commander in the West, is awakened at his headquarters outside Paris and informed of the situation. His first concern is not panic, but verification. For months, intelligence reports have warned that the Allies will attempt to mislead German forces into committing reserves prematurely. The Pas-de-Calais remains the most heavily defended sector for precisely that reason. Rundstedt understands that a premature decision could expose the true invasion site. His orders emphasize restraint until confirmation is absolute. Farther south, in Paris, the operations staff of the German High Command begins receiving similar reports. General Alfred Jodl is informed that airborne troops are landing in Normandy, but the scale remains unclear. Naval reports suggest a large fleet, yet German analysts note that Allied exercises and feints have often involved simulated armadas. Jodl advises caution and informs Adolf Hitler that the situation is developing. Hitler, who has reserved personal authority over the armored reserves, is asleep and is not immediately awakened. Along the coast, German infantry units are already engaged. At Utah and Omaha beaches, coastal defenders are under sustained naval fire as landing craft approach in waves. Communications lines are severed by bombing and sabotage. Local commanders request permission to move reserves, but authorization requires confirmation from higher headquarters. The German command structure, designed to ensure centralized control, now slows the flow of action at the worst possible moment. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commander of Army Group B, is not present. He is in Germany, having left his headquarters days earlier to attend his wife's birthday and to confer with Hitler about reinforcements. His absence removes the one senior commander most convinced that the invasion would come at dawn and that immediate counteraction would be decisive. In his place, staff officers follow standing orders and await clarity. As dawn approaches, the scale of the assault begins to sharpen. Aerial reconnaissance confirms massive naval formations stretching across the horizon. Reports from coastal divisions confirm that landings are underway on multiple beaches. Paratroopers are holding key road junctions inland. The question facing German leadership is no longer whether an invasion is occurring, but whether this is the main effort or the opening act of a larger deception aimed at Calais. Rundstedt presses for the release of armored divisions held in reserve. He understands that speed is essential and that delay favors the attackers. But authority over the panzer divisions rests with Hitler alone. Without his approval, movement is limited. Requests are sent. Time passes. The Allied beachheads expand as troops and equipment come ashore under naval and air cover that German forces cannot effectively contest. By mid-morning, the reports have grown grimly consistent. The volume of Allied shipping exceeds any previous operation. Casualty reports indicate sustained fighting rather than probing attacks. Yet even now, uncertainty persists within German headquarters. Intelligence officers warn that committing reserves too early could leave Calais vulnerable to a second, larger landing. The weight of months of preparation for deception now presses heavily against the need for decisive action. Inside German command rooms, the mood shifts from caution to strain. Officers understand the stakes. Normandy is not the most heavily fortified sector. If the Allies are allowed to establish themselves there, removing them will require resources Germany no longer possesses. But doctrine, hierarchy, and fear of acting without permission hold firm. By late morning, Hitler is finally informed in full. Orders are discussed, revised, delayed. Armored divisions begin to move, but only after critical hours have been lost. The opportunity for a coordinated counterattack against vulnerable beachheads has passed. What remains is containment, not prevention. As June 6th continues, German commanders confront a reality they have prepared for in theory, but never faced in fact. An Allied army is now ashore in France in overwhelming strength. The reports that began before dawn have become confirmation of a turning point, and the day is no longer about stopping the invasion, but about surviving its consequences. By late morning on June 6th, German frontline commanders along the Normandy coast are no longer in doubt about the scale of the assault. Infantry units report continuous landings supported by naval gunfire that cannot be answered effectively. The air above the beaches is dominated by Allied aircraft, limiting German movement in daylight. Messages from regimental and divisional commanders carry the same urgency. Immediate counterattacks are required before the enemy consolidates. At 7th Army headquarters, staff officers struggle to translate these demands into action. The German system of command, designed for order and control, now reveals its rigidity. Armored divisions capable of decisive intervention are held back by command authority that rests above the men who can see the battlefield. Requests move upward through layers of approval while Allied forces move forward without interruption. Field Marshal von Rundstedt presses again for the release of the Panzer reserves. He argues that even an imperfect counterattack launched quickly offers better prospects than a coordinated response launched too late. His experience tells him that hesitation will cost ground that cannot be recovered. Yet his authority is limited. Hitler's standing order reserves direct control of the armored divisions to himself, reflecting a deep mistrust of his generals after earlier failures. General Alfred Jodl, now fully engaged at high command, weighs the reports with visible tension. He is caught between professional military assessment and political obedience. Releasing the armored reserves without Hitler's explicit approval risks personal disgrace and possible removal. Waiting risks strategic collapse. Jodl chooses compliance, forwarding information upward while refraining from unilateral action. Meanwhile, German field commanders improvise with what they have. Infantry units counterattack isolated airborne positions where possible. Some local successes are achieved against scattered paratroopers, but these actions lack coordination and sufficient strength. Without armored support, German forces cannot exploit their gains or strike at the expanding beachheads. The absence of Erwin Rommel continues to shape events. Rommel has long argued that the invasion must be defeated at the shoreline before Allied air and naval power make maneuver impossible. His defensive strategy emphasizes immediate aggressive response by mobile forces positioned close to the coast. In his absence, that philosophy lacks an advocate with authority. His staff officers understand his intent, but lack the power to override standing orders. By early afternoon, Hitler authorizes limited movement of certain armored units. The decision comes too late to exploit the vulnerability of the initial landings. Movement is slow, hampered by Allied air attacks and damaged infrastructure. The window for a decisive blow has closed. What remains is a series of delayed, piecemeal engagements. Within German headquarters, frustration grows. Officers recognize the consequences of centralized control colliding with battlefield reality. Many have been trained to value initiative, yet years of command culture have conditioned them to obey, even when obedience undermines effectiveness. The invasion exposes this contradiction with brutal clarity. As the day wears on, reports of Allied strength become increasingly stark. Thousands of vehicles are ashore, supplies flow continuously, beach exits are secured, German counterattacks, where attempted, are repelled with heavy losses. The balance of power shifts visibly, hour by hour. By evening, the German command dilemma has resolved itself through inaction. The armored reserves are committed too late and in too fragmented a manner to change the outcome. The Allies are no longer vulnerable. They are established. German commanders understand this, even if official orders avoid acknowledging it. The invasion has revealed a truth long feared, but rarely spoken aloud within the German system. Command without flexibility becomes paralysis under pressure. The failure to act decisively on June 6th is not the result of individual cowardice or ignorance, but of a structure that prioritizes control over reality. As darkness returns to Normandy, German officers prepare for another day of fighting, aware that the moment for prevention has passed. What lies ahead is no longer a test of readiness, but a prolonged struggle against an enemy who now holds the initiative. By the afternoon of June 6th, German headquarters in France and Germany are no longer debating whether Normandy is a diversion. The flow of reports has reached a volume and consistency that strips away remaining doubt. Aerial reconnaissance confirms dense concentrations of Allied shipping off multiple beaches. Naval commanders report sustained bombardment unmatched in duration or intensity. Army units report continuous landings, expanding beachheads, and airborne troops operating well inland. The invasion is real, and it is larger than any previous Allied operation. At Field Marshal von Rundstedt's headquarters, the tone of discussion hardens. There is no longer talk of preventing the landing, only of limiting its expansion. Rundstedt understands what this means. The German army in the West lacks the strength for prolonged offensive action. Every hour the Allies remain ashore increases their advantage in men, armor, and logistics. The question is no longer whether the enemy can be stopped at the beaches, but whether a defensible line can be formed before collapse spreads. General Alfred Jodl receives updated estimates that confirm the scale of the assault. By nightfall, Allied forces will exceed 150,000 men landed by sea and air. The number is staggering even to officers accustomed to large-scale warfare. The German army has never faced an amphibious operation of this magnitude, conducted under complete Allied air and naval superiority. The realization forces a shift not just in planning, but in mindset. Adolf Hitler responds to the accumulating evidence with a mixture of anger and denial. He remains convinced that a second decisive landing will come at the Pas de Calais. Orders continue to emphasize holding reserves back for that eventuality. This fixation shapes German deployment even as Normandy burns. Senior officers recognize the danger of this thinking, but none openly challenge it. The culture of obedience holds even as its cost becomes clear. Erwin Rommel returns to his headquarters late in the day and absorbs the situation with visible frustration. He tours forward positions and sees the effects of Allied firepower firsthand. Roads are cratered, communications shattered, units disorganized. He immediately grasps what the delay has cost. Rommel argues for concentrating available forces against the beachheads before Allied logistics solidify. His urgency reflects experience, not optimism. He knows the odds are poor, but delay makes them worse. German commanders at lower levels feel the weight of the same realization. Reports from regiments and battalions describe an enemy who cannot be dislodged with existing resources. Requests for reinforcements multiply, but there are few to send. The German army in France has been weakened by transfers to the Eastern Front and by chronic shortages of fuel, vehicles, and trained replacements. The invasion exposes these weaknesses without mercy. As night falls, staff officers compile situation maps that tell a grim story. The Allied lodgment stretches across multiple sectors. Key road networks are threatened. Airfields inland are contested. German losses mount, not just in men, but in cohesion. Units fight bravely, but in isolation. The operational picture no longer supports coordinated response. Inside command rooms, conversations turn quieter. There is less argument, more calculation. Officers understand that the war in the West has entered a new phase. The strategic initiative has shifted decisively. Germany must now fight defensively on ground chosen by the enemy. This is not acknowledged in official communiques, but it is understood privately. The realization carries a psychological toll. Many German officers have spent years believing that discipline and preparation could overcome material disadvantage. Normandy proves otherwise. Air power, naval dominance, and industrial capacity now dictate the terms of battle. Courage and experience remain, but they are no longer sufficient. By the end of June 6, the German command structure has adjusted to a new reality it did not choose and cannot reverse. The Allies are ashore in strength. The opportunity to shape the battle has been lost. What remains is the effort to endure, to delay, and to impose cost where possible. The longest day ends not with a single decisive moment, but with a collective understanding settling across German headquarters. The war in Western Europe has turned, and the path ahead leads only through sustained retreat and attrition. As June 6 turns into night, German commanders across Normandy confront the consequences of decisions already made and those never taken. Reports from the front confirm what maps and casualty figures have begun to show. Allied forces are not only ashore but entrenched. Beach exits are secured. Artillery is in position. Supplies continue to arrive without interruption. The conditions required to drive the enemy back into the sea no longer exist. Field Marshal von Rundstedt reviews the situation with grim clarity. His experience tells him that the window for decisive counteraction has closed. German forces lack the concentration, mobility, and air cover needed to strike effectively. What remains is a defensive struggle aimed at slowing the inevitable. Rundstedt understands that this assessment, while accurate, offers no comfort and no political safety. Admitting irreversible failure carries its own risks. Erwin Rommel presses for immediate action wherever possible. He orders local counterattacks to disrupt Allied consolidation and to seize any opportunity, however limited. These efforts achieve isolated tactical successes, but fail to alter the broader situation. Allied firepower responds quickly and decisively. German units suffer losses they cannot replace. Rommel's reports reflect urgency without illusion. He knows the invasion cannot be undone, only contested. At higher headquarters, Adolf Hitler refuses to accept the full implications of the day's events. He continues to believe that Normandy may still be a secondary effort. Orders emphasize holding ground at all costs and preparing for further landings elsewhere. This insistence on ideological certainty over operational reality deepens the disconnect between command and battlefield. Senior officers comply, knowing that resistance would be futile and dangerous. General Alfred Jodl attempts to reconcile these positions. He drafts orders that reflect Hitler's intent while quietly acknowledging the limitations faced by commanders in the field. His role becomes one of translation rather than leadership. The structure of command leaves little room for dissent and none for initiative that contradicts political authority. Within German units, the psychological impact is immediate. Soldiers who have held their positions under intense bombardment now face the prospect of continuous engagement against a superior enemy. Morale remains disciplined but strained. Officers recognize that courage alone will not change the outcome. The sense of fighting for time, rather than victory, takes hold. As darkness covers Normandy, German commanders conduct assessments that are increasingly sober. They note shortages of fuel and ammunition. Communications remain unreliable. Reinforcements arrive slowly, if at all. Allied air activity resumes at first light, further restricting movement. The operational environment is hostile and unyielding. The weight of failure settles unevenly. Some commanders internalize responsibility, replaying decisions made under pressure. Others deflect blame upward, toward a system that denied them freedom of action. Few speak openly. The culture of silence persists, even as understanding deepens. The invasion has succeeded not just because of Allied strength, but because German command structures have proven incapable of responding effectively to surprise at scale. By the end of the night, German leadership accepts a truth it cannot publicly state. The strategic balance in Western Europe has shifted permanently. Normandy will not be sealed off. The Allies will build from this foothold, drawing on resources Germany cannot match. Every subsequent decision will be shaped by this reality. The failure of June 6th is not a single error, but a convergence of doctrine, authority, and hesitation. It marks the moment when preparation gives way to consequence. German commanders prepare for a prolonged defense, knowing that each day forward will cost more than the last, and that retreat, not recovery, now defines the road ahead. In the days following June 6th, German headquarters adjust to a new operational reality that cannot be reversed. Reports from Normandy confirm that Allied forces continue to expand their positions despite determined resistance. Roads once intended for rapid German movement are now dominated by Allied aircraft. Supply lines are strained, communications remain unreliable, and unit cohesion deteriorates under constant pressure. The invasion has moved beyond its opening phase and into a sustained campaign. Field Marshal von Rundstedt issues assessments that are increasingly defensive in tone. He recommends strategic withdrawals to shorten lines and preserve remaining strength. These recommendations reflect professional judgment, not defeatism. Yet they clash with directives from Adolf Hitler, who insists on holding ground regardless of cost. The resulting compromise satisfies neither necessity nor ideology. German forces are ordered to stand fast in positions that cannot be adequately reinforced or supplied. Erwin Rommel continues to visit frontline units, observing conditions firsthand. He sees exhausted soldiers, damaged equipment, and positions exposed to overwhelming firepower. His reports emphasize realism. He warns that Allied air superiority makes daylight movement nearly impossible, and that armored units are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. Rommel's tone is urgent but controlled. He does not argue that the war is lost, but he makes clear that the campaign in France is turning decisively against Germany. At high command, General Alfred Jodl coordinates responses that grow increasingly reactive. Decisions are shaped by shortages rather than strategy. Fuel allocations dictate movement. Ammunition stocks limit engagement. Reinforcements are drawn from units already weakened by years of combat. The ability to shape events has narrowed to delaying actions and local counterattacks intended to impose cost rather than achieve decisive results. Within German leadership circles, reflection begins quietly. Officers discuss the failures of June 6th in private terms. They acknowledge the delay in releasing armored reserves, the underestimation of Allied capabilities, and the consequences of centralized control. These discussions do not reach official records, but they influence how commanders approach the weeks ahead. The invasion has exposed systemic weaknesses that no single order can correct. The human cost becomes increasingly visible. Casualty reports grow longer. Replacement troops arrive with limited training. Medical services are overwhelmed. Soldiers fight on with discipline, but the strain is evident. The sense of fighting a war that can no longer be won spreads unevenly, resisted by ideology in some quarters and accepted quietly in others. Adolf Hitler responds to setbacks with renewed demands for loyalty and endurance. He dismisses suggestions of strategic withdrawal as defeatist.